Tim again, coming to you from Central Texas. United Methodist Church is there at Bend and Lomita. We are going through the Bible, talking about various aspects, ideas, events, and now we're talking about parables of Jesus. They were very important to him to explain the faith to people who mostly couldn't read. And so the storytelling was an important aspect, a way to remember the truth. They weren't interested in doctrine. They weren't interested in long, extended teaching. What they were interested in is understanding the truth and insight into God's kingdom. And the best way to do that was through comparisons. And so Jesus told a parable about the unforgiving servant. The story is that the king called into his servants to make account. He had maybe it was a bad season for being king, and he needed that money back. But he had trusted money to some of his servants, and he called a servant in. And part of the story is that the shocking parts are the parts to pay attention to. The king had entrusted the servant with more than $1 million. Now, why you entrust your servant with $1 million, I don't know. But the king had done that. Maybe he'd been out of town. Maybe he had entrusted the paying of the local bills or buying stuff out of the market, dealing with contractors. We don't know, but he gave him, entrusted him $1 million to take care of. And the king says, now it's time to pay it back. And the servant says, I can't do that. I don't have it. Please give me a little more time. Now the king takes pity upon him and says, okay, listen, I'm going to forgive your debt more than the servant even asked. He said, I am erasing the debt. You owe me nothing. Forgiving $1 million debt. That's amazing. And the servant then is so elated, he goes out into the courtyard and out into the city, and he runs across another servant who owes him $100. And he says, pay me my $100. And the servant says, I don't have it. Give me a little more time. It sounds familiar, doesn't it? And he said, no. And he has the local authorities throw him in debtor's prison. And the king hears about that and calls him back in and said, listen, I forgave you a huge debt, and you should be able to forgive a little debt from your fellow servant. How come you haven't learned forgiveness? And he withdraws that forgiveness, and the servant is then thrown into prison. Part of what Jesus is telling us is that if we are forgiven, we ought to learn to forgive. If we've received forgiveness from other people, we ought to know what it feels like. We ought to know what it's like to be on the other side of that and forgive other folks. In fact, Jesus said in his Lord's Prayer, the Lord's Prayer that we use every Sunday, forgive us our debts, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. When you are unforgiving, you cut yourself off from being forgiven. You've chosen a nature that makes you hard to forgive, and so it's hard to be forgiven when you have that nature. So part of the nature of God is to forgive people, and because of his generosity, because of God's love and care and willingness not to hold things against us, we ought to learn to do that to one another. Don't hold it against people when they make mistakes. Don't hold it against people when they do something that offends you. Forgive, just like God has forgiven us such great a debt. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you next time. Just in the nickness of time. Mm-hmm.